Victoria El-Hayek grew up in Ohio and earned a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in bioethics from Case Western Reserve University. She is currently a second-year medical student at Ohio State University and discusses how mentors and representation made a difference in her life. She is passionate about breaking down the barriers that keep minority and low-income communities from receiving quality healthcare.
My name is Victoria Hayek. I'm currently a second year medical student at Ohio State University. I grew up in Ohio, so I've been here for quite some time, but I went to undergrad at Case Western Reserve up in Cleveland, and spent some time doing some research there before starting med school here.
Okay, and how far along are you in med school?
I'm halfway through my second year.
Okay, cool. That's exciting. Can you give us like a quick overview of the path or like decisions that led you to where you are, like how you decided you even wanted to go to med school?
Yeah, I definitely had a bit of a non-traditional path. Like I said, I went to undergrad at Case Western and I studied psychology there. And I always had an interest in science. I grew up luckily in a family that had a few people who worked in healthcare. So I was kind of surrounded by that a bit growing up. And I really enjoyed it. So I went there studying psychology with a focus in pre-medicine. But I wasn't really set on medical school for a while. And then I did a program where Case is a program where you can do a dual degree. So I did my bachelor's in psychology, but my master's in bioethics with a focus in medicine, society, and culture. And it was when I was studying that master's degree that I realized how many issues there were in the system, particularly when it came to communities like Black and Latinx communities. It just, the disparities they faced and the inequalities blew my mind. So I took some time off after undergrad to do more research in that area. So I worked at a hospital. It was a safety net hospital, so it's mostly like underserved communities going there. And I did a lot of research with them, trying to figure out like what the barriers are to healthcare for these communities. And then from there, I decided to get my master's of public health at Columbia University to further study this. So I spent a year in New York studying public health and figuring out more ways to basically just get to the bottom of these barriers, and like what it is that we can do as future healthcare providers to fix this. And I wanted to do all this before starting medical school because I knew studying medicine wasn't enough to actually fix these problems since they're so deep rooted and it's not really something you teach with medicine a lot of times, which is very unfortunate. So I did all of that before finally coming to medical school, which is where I am now. And I'm hoping to use all of this to in the future start doing more. I want to do more like policy work and program implementation work for some communities such as the Latin communities in America, and bring back to them, because I think it's really important, since I mean you could see the stats and the studies that show they're consistently the ones who are overlooked and who are suffering way more than any other communities when it comes to a lot of preventable diseases and things like that, which is just super unnecessary.
Wow, that's crazy. Is there like, this is kind of out of what I'm supposed to ask you, but it's really interesting. Is there any like boundary or any reason that's like prevalent for them to not have access or to not have good access to healthcare?
There are multiple reasons. A big reason, honestly, though, is because of the fact that there is such little representation. A lot of people
Wow.
feel very uncomfortable going to a physician who doesn't understand them, doesn't look like them, and things that creates kind of a barrier, especially when there's that communication barrier, because a lot of them like don't have that background knowledge, and it's really hard for them to communicate that, especially with something that they don't feel comfortable with. So I think that's honestly one of the biggest problems is they don't have somebody they can relate to, because when it comes to finding a good provider, that's a big part of it, is having somebody you can trust. And there just isn't that trust there because they don't have somebody that they can like talk to. So I think that's a big part of it, which is really unfortunate, because that goes back to the fact that there aren't Latinos in STEM, in particular medicine. There just aren't enough of us. And I think if we can increase that representation, we can increase that barrier access. But it also goes down to like the inequalities with just the socioeconomic inequalities, because that also really ties into healthcare and healthcare access.
Right. Okay, excellent. So next question is, did you have any mentors that helped you to get where you are today?
Yeah, I think mentorship is probably the biggest reason I ended up where I am. I got very fortunate because growing up, I grew up in a community that was, it was 97% white. So it was really
Wow.
hard for me to find that in my like home community. So I think that was something that I struggled with a lot growing up. But then I was fortunate enough to go to Case Western, where they did have a few Latinos there. So they had this organization for undergrads, where freshmen Latino students could get an older Latino mentor. So when I came to Case, that was the first thing I signed up for. I was like, I need to meet somebody else like me, see what they're doing, see how they've made it. So they paired
Mhm.
me up with a student who was 2 years older than me. And it was through her that I started to meet a ton of other Latina students, not only in Cleveland, but she showed me how to go to like national conferences around in different cities. I went to a conference in Chicago. I went to a conference in Baltimore. With through different national Hispanic organizations, which
Mhm.
introduced me to thousands of Hispanics doing incredible things all over the country. And it was through that mentorship that I started to realize that there are a lot of other people like me out there. You just have to kind of find them. I think that was something I really needed at that point because I just had never seen that growing up. So I got very fortunate that I was able to find a mentor very early on in college. And I think that was a very pivotal moment in my career path to getting to where I am now.
For sure. That's seriously so important for us. I had a similar experience but reversed. So I went to a majority like Black high school, and then I ended up at a majority white college. So it was very, very hard to like connect with people. I remember my first year, very tough
Yeah.
to like feel like I fit in, and on top of that, see people that were also Latinx that were like interested in like bettering themselves and like making changes.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
going to college is a hard enough adjustment in itself. So to
mhm,
not be able to fit in and feel like you're alone there makes it so much worse.
100%. I'm so glad that you found that. So next question is, do you have any advice that you'd give yourself back in high school or middle school? And attached to that as well, if you have any advice specifically for students that are in that situation right now.
I mean, I think for me, something that would have been nice to just have someone sit down and tell me is that there really isn't a profession in this world that people like us don't belong in. And because that, like,
Mhm.
you don't have to hide any part of who you are, where you come from. Because the fact that there's only like what 8% of Latinos in STEM right now is a huge weakness. And I honestly think they need people like us for the field to keep growing because right now I think it's at a stalemate and it's not going to change unless they have more diversity. So I think they're really lacking without us. So I think that's something we have to remember is that they do need us. And it might feel like we're alone sometimes in this, and it's really hard not to feel alone, but I promise you aren't. There are other people out there. You just have to find them. And I also to remember that like I think there are other people like me where our parents did come to this country in order to give us better opportunities than what they had. And
Mhm.
so that kind of just set the foundation for us to not only go against the odds, but be a part of changing the odds. And I think that's something that's super important because it's you see that there's only 8% of Latinos in STEM, and that can be terrifying. But the only way to change that is to be a part of that. So just remember, like you can be a part of changing this process and making it better for not only yourself, but other people in our community.
100%. Oh my gosh. All I have is yes. That's so true. Okay, so you basically answered the next question I was going to ask you. So we'll just skip that. And do you have like a definition of STEM? So like beyond the acronym, let's say you had to describe it to someone who had no idea what it was. How would you do that?
That's a good question. STEM outside the acronym to me, I think, would be just somebody who is curious about just learning more and continually changing things and pushing boundaries. And that's a big part of STEM. It's like, yes, it's science, technology, medicine, all of those things. But I mean, it's even within that, like science is so broad, technology is broad, even medicine is very broad. There's so many things within that. Like it doesn't, you don't have to be a physician to be in STEM. You don't have to be an engineer. Like it's more about like being willing to change the fields that you're in and push the boundaries farther than what they are now. And I think using that to help others grow too and just continuing, I think growth is a huge part of it, just continuing to grow the field and change the world and things like that, I think is a huge part of STEM.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Um, and then one sort of last like fun question, I guess. Is there someone that you admire that you'd say like other people could sorry, could look up to as well? Like, is there anyone maybe on social media or like even in your personal life? I don't know, someone that you're like, wow, like this person is amazing. Like this is a person to aspire to be like.
Hmm. Let me think. The first person that comes to mind is another medical student here. I just thought it was funny because she graduated last year, but she was another Latino student, and
Mhm.
they at the end of our medical career they kind of do like these superlatives for the last year for the people who are graduating, and she got the superlative that was the biggest rebel, and it like almost sounded kind of bad, but at the same time I thought it was really cool and I really admired that because she was one of those students who spoke out about everything she saw that was wrong in our university, because while there are some Latinos here and some people of color here, it's not where it should be, especially within the faculty. Like we don't have much representation. And she was one of the few students who was very verbal about that.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that I really respected because I know how hard it can be to speak up, especially when you are just a student and you kind of feel like you're below these people. But to be able to go to admin and be like, I see these issues, they're wrong, and we need to do something about it now, I think it just shows true strength. So that's definitely one person I strongly admire, and I hope to be like when I would not mind getting biggest rebel when I
Aw.
graduate, basically. I think it's a huge
Yes,
compliment, and I would love to be that student at some point.
you should. Oh my gosh. That would be really cool. Okay, that's all the questions. Do you have anything that you'd like to add just to tell anyone listening to this? Um, any extra piece of advice, anything?
And I think a big thing is I know imposter syndrome is huge, especially in our community,
Mhm.
and it's something that almost all of us face at some point, whether it's briefly or continuously. But just know that you're not the only one feeling this way, and don't let that hinder you. I mean, if anything, use that to propel yourself forward and prove everybody wrong that you can do this and you deserve this, because you really do. Like, no matter what anybody says, no matter what it looks like, we deserve to be where we are. There's a reason our parents came here, our grandparents came here, whoever it was. Like, we need to use that and show people that we deserve this.